Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Boss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. It is June 30th, Friday. It's approximately 5 p.m., and I want to talk about the most recent Supreme Court decision. The decision on affirmative action that will have an impact rippling across this nation. It will affect many businesses. It will, of course, affect education. And it's going to affect you. There is no question on that. It will change lives forever. But is it good? Is it bad? Is it evil, racist? So many things that we are hearing in the news media today coming from the left-leaning news media. That's a very different question, and I'm going to try and address it. Now, let's be fair before I say anything else. Is there a bias in this conversation? Of course there is. I'm a black Hispanic. I'm 55 years old. I've seen racism, true racism, after the civil rights movement, and I've seen what we call racism today in 2023. There is going to be a bias, but I'm at least honest about my bias as opposed to what we're hearing from the left-leaning media. But we will try to endeavor to be as honest and fair and realistic about what has happened and how it will affect us going forward. Now, if this is the first time that you've ever seen our channel, we welcome you and thank you for joining us. We do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to hear your voice, to be able to speak to you no matter where you are in the world, to allow you to call in, to leave your text, to speak about the issues that matter, because we believe in the First Amendment. It's not just an American principle, it is a principle of everyone in the world. So we hope you will join us this Sunday and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to add your voice to the conversation of all the things affecting us. But one of the things that is affecting us is race relations, it is racism, it is affirmative action, diversity, and equity. These are the issues that affect us all. In fact, these are issues that America has been exporting to other nations, like in the United Kingdom in particular, but also into France and Germany, Europe and Canada, Australia and New Zealand. The views of the political left on what is racism, what is segregation, and its roots deeply entrenched in slavery in the United States, not slavery in the world, which continues to exist. In fact, there is more slavery in the world today than has existed at any point in time in the history of mankind. But we don't talk about it in those terms. We have other names, or we just exclude it. We don't talk about Africa. We don't talk about the human trafficking, which is slavery. We don't talk about that. No, when we say slavery, when we talk about race relations, we mean specifically the 1860s in the United States, and that is the message sent out around the world. Is that fair? Not at all. Is it accurate? Not at all. But that is the political messaging and the way it has been framed for decades. So let's deal with that reality as it is. Affirmative action, and we will get into where its creation came from and how it's affecting us going forward, is not a new thing. It has existed throughout my lifetime of 55 years. In fact, being implemented shortly after my lifetime started. And it had a direct purpose. And the question that the Supreme Court was addressing today is, does that purpose still exist? The Supreme Court decided, no, it does not. To be clear, the case against Harvard and the University of North Carolina was, is it legal, is it constitutional to allow those institutions to segregate people based on the color of their skin? This is an important issue. And if you frame it in those words, which was the case, then it doesn't matter if we're talking about black or white, Asian or Hispanic. It is a determination based on someone's skin color. It is about their race. And any race can be interjected in that argument to help determine the answer. I know it is popular today to say that, well, white people are evil and that they are bad. That's the basis of critical race theory, that white people are inherently racist, and this is systemic and subconscious, and therefore they need to be subjugated. We disagree with that viewpoint, but that is the current viewpoint. And to counter that systemic, intrinsic evil, well, we need things like both critical race theory in our schools, but also we need affirmative action and, for women, the equal rights movement to try and correct this, because the groups, the individuals involved, do not have the agency to correct it themselves. We will address that issue shortly as well. But that is the argument, and that's why Harvard and many of the left want to continue to have affirmative action, and many others do not. Let us not leave out of this that this is a political issue. This is purely based in politics. The decisions and the reaction to the decision is based in politics today, modern politics, because it is a huge calling card of the left, a tactic of the left, to use race in every aspect, race and sexuality in every aspect, whether it be in putting in a Supreme Court justice like Ketanji Brown Jackson, whether it be the vice presidency with Kamala Harris, whether it be everyday life, diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, divisions in our human resources, in every business, ESG, it is rampant. We must understand the context that we are dealing with this in, both in terms of the decision and the reaction. But the decision should be about what is constitutional. That is not what the argument is about. To explain that, let me show you that. This is the argument as it is being posed by the Washington Post. We see their tweet, which came out today, June 30th at 2:46 p.m., and they are attacking Justice Clarence Thomas in 1983, saying that he was in favor of affirmative action until he wasn't, that he is essentially, this is the Washington Post calling Clarence Thomas an Uncle Tom, a sellout, a traitor to black people in America, to be the villain against all people of color. They say, decades before he was among the Supreme Court justices who restricted the use of affirmative action in higher education, Justice Clarence Thomas, they leave out the fact that he's a Supreme Court justice, said, quote, "God only knows where I would be today," end quote, "if not for legal principles on equal employment opportunity measures such as affirmative action." Now, the quote they use is, quote, "These laws and their proper application are all that stand between the first 17 years of my life and the second 17, from when he was 34. So let's think about that for a second. They have framed this in an emotional, reactionary, and race-based manner. This is about Clarence Thomas being a traitor to black people, that if you are someone like Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, in other words, black, conservative to any degree, and disagreeing and disavowing of policies and practices of the left, then you're a bad person. This is meant to chill the First Amendment. This is meant to reinforce obedience without question. Because in this quote, and in the manner that they have framed this, the Washington Post leaves out a key consideration. Is the restriction of affirmative action constitutional? Is it constitutional to decide who gets to go into a business, who gets to be employed or to have services based on the color of their skin? That is the core question. Is it constitutional to segregate and to have prejudice against individuals based on their skin color? That ultimately and entirely is the argument that Clarence Thomas was addressing along with the other Supreme Court justices. That is the argument that the Washington Post does not want to address. Now, this is important. It makes a difference because we have seen that the news media is framing this in a very specific manner. They have an agenda, and this agenda is implicit but not stated explicitly for the most part. There are exceptions to that. As an example, when the LA Times called Larry Elder the blackface of white supremacy. Many people may have forgotten about that. I haven't, and we talked about it at that time. That the left-leaning media is perfectly fine with attacking anyone who would dare challenge their supremacy, their control, and anyone who would dare ask the public to ask questions, to think about the consequences of the legislation and the policies that are being enacted. Larry Elder isn't a Democrat. He isn't a progressive. He does not blindly follow their policies. He does question them, and he believes that they are not beneficial. And for that, he is labeled as a white supremacist, that he is, again, an Uncle Tom, that he is someone who hates his race, not because of his views, but because, or rather, just because his views don't match up, but because he is an example of something they do not want to address, much like what we see with Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. This is very troubling when we think about this and understand it for what it is. There is an implicit bias that is built into this that is not being expressed. It would be one thing if the Washington Post, if the LA Times, if the left-leaning media were to be honest and to say that they have a preference, that they have a belief system, and that they feel anyone who opposes it is wrong. If they were to be honest and to say that up front, that would be one thing. That is their opinion. It is America. They have that right. But instead, they are using the shield of their institutions, their subjective credibility, to use it as a shield and say that they are correct and anyone else is incorrect, and that they will use the weight and power of their institutions, like the LA Times, like the Washington Post, to subjugate anyone who does not conform to what they want. This is the core of what we are seeing as the reaction to what the Supreme Court has decided. It is not about whether or not the inherent core issue of segregation, of racism, of prejudice, that's the core issue, and they will not address that. They are addressing the tangible question: obedience, subservience. Are you obeying what they have decreed? Are you doing what they prefer, what they feel is right? That's what Washington Post, LA Times, the left-leaning media, many Democrats, that's what they are focused on. Do you obey what they say? That's not the issue at hand. The issue at hand is this constitutional? We say that over and over again because it is a core and important issue that is not being addressed. Where does this all come from? Let's look at the root of this. Let's take the time to have the conversation, because this is not a 30-second soundbite. This cannot be conveyed in a minute and a half by the mainstream news media. To understand this issue and its ramifications, its consequences, takes more than a minute and a half if you wish to do it intelligently, if you're not merely being subservient and obedient. So at the core, looking at July 4th, 1776, we declared as a nation, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with the certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." This is critical. This is the core tenet and bedrock of what it is to be American. That the United States, from its first instance, is based on the self-evident truth an absolute truth, not a relative truth, not a feeling, but an absolute fact that human beings are equal and that they have rights that governments cannot take away, that they do not get their rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness from government or being governed, but from the intrinsic act of being alive. Who is human and therefore would have these things applied to them is something somewhat subjective. And in the 1800s, 90 years later, the United States would go into a civil war. We would fight about the Civil War, and now we have romanticized that Civil War. We often hear, as PBS notes here, and all links will be in the description, they say, well, we remember that the Civil War was fought over a moral issue of slavery. Whether or not slavery was moral, not whether it was constitutional, nor any other factor, but is it moral to enslave other individuals? And honestly, that's not what the Civil War was about. The morality of slavery was maybe fifth on the list of issues that were being addressed. The key issues were about states' rights. It was about economics, including the economics of slavery. It was about politics, about the power that slavery might engender to individuals. It was about political beliefs and those political differences, as well as economic beliefs and how those economics were affecting people's lives. This was not about morality. In fact, we even see that President Abraham Lincoln stated, I believe it was August of 1862, where in the New York Times of the day, President Lincoln said, quote, "My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and it is not either to save or to destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would do that. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save this union. And what I forbear because I do not believe it would help to save the union." Let's step away from the romanticization that we have of the Civil War, of the South, of the North in the 1800s, which is what we have today. A romantic view of what that struggle was about, an elevated view of certain political issues because those issues are used today to fight in politics and elections right now. It has very little to do with the reality of the time, which had to do with economics, it had to do with politics, in particular states' rights, and that issue of a small government and its growing power and attempts at power. These are the critical issues, with a result of those issues being a decision on slavery forever. That, of course, led in his comments and his view, President Lincoln, on his view of slavery and the future of the Union. What would unify this nation going forward? And that would wind up being the 14th Amendment. And in the 14th Amendment, they state, and I quote here in Section 1, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." This is critical, and I want to restate one part. No state, the government, will not make or enhance any law that takes away the privileges or the rights of being a citizen. You cannot take away someone's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You cannot prejudice against someone as any citizen of the United States based on any factor of that person, their sex, their gender, and that was even further clarified, giving women the right to vote. But again, they've clarified what was already stated initially in the Declaration of Independence. Now, this seems really simple. We've gone through this in school, except we've gone through this in a different way. We've made this about slavery and said, well, slavery is about morality, and that was the only issue. It was the only thing that was being discussed in the 1800s, and therefore the only concern. That's not true. It was about the future of America as a unified nation, about the focus of this country, and how we could unify all peoples that declare themselves as, or are declared as, citizens of the United States. It was a solution not just to the problem at hand, but the problem of a growing nation down the road. That's slavery. And we'll jump forward a bit, because obviously, after the Civil War, we had the Jim Crow laws, we had the black codes of Congress that allowed separate but equal, which was the ultimate conclusion of that. People were restricted based on the color of their skin. They were still being oppressed. They were being punished or ostracized because of the color of the skin. And we developed this system of separate institutions, parallel institutions, whether in education or government, business, otherwise, that we had parallel institutions running at the same time based on someone's skin color, and that was the only difference. That's not something that would unify the Union, to keep the nation together. It was ultimately and always going to be a point of difference and differentiation and fracturing of the Union. That's a fact. And therefore, it at some point had to be addressed. But America was in the process of a transition. America was moving from a nation that was looking at some individuals as secondary individuals, that they were second-class citizens, they were second-class human beings, to a nation where everyone was valued for themselves as an individual. It's a transition that the United States was not unique in making. This happened across the entire world, especially in what would become the first world nations. But America's approach was unique. But that had a breaking point. You could not continue to grow as a nation and have separate laws and separate justice involved. It would not work. We had to address this to unify. Part of that was the focus of the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, and championed by individuals like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, although they were not the only individuals to do so. And in the 1950s and 1960s, they made the cry that all men are equal, that we are all the same, that we are all just as valuable, we are all individuals with unalienable rights given by God, that we have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Or in other words, the equality of opportunity. We all have the right to have a chance to succeed or fail, and they should be equal. That there should be no difference, no segregation, no diminution of these rights based on someone's outward intrinsic characteristics, the color of their skin, their sex, their sexuality. This is what we grow to understand. So affirmative action was instituted in the 1960s, 1970s as a way to correct the system, to further that transition from what we had initially as slavery. We transitioned into Jim Crow, and black codes, we then further transitioned after the civil rights movement into integration and into a unified nation, and affirmative action was part of that integration, that next step in acceptance and unity. That was its core purpose, to integrate the nation, to remove a fracture, a divisive point in our nation, and to accept the initial tenets of this nation, that all men are created equal, period. That leads us to, and I will skip to 2013. In 2013, we had some 50 years of affirmative action. And the question from its inception and continuing is, should we have affirmative action? Does affirmative action have a place? It is a government-instituted prejudice based on someone's color of skin. It is an equity, a system of equity, where a category of people have been placed above all other categories of people because the government said so. That is not equal. That is not fair. It is not. It is a form of prejudice and bias. Inherently, by its action and by its definition. But its purpose was meant to be temporary and allow for integration, a correction of harms long-term that had restricted individuals from continuing to live their life. Not that people didn't live their life, not that people did not succeed. There was a black middle class. There were many successful towns and individuals. Blacks were getting elected into Congress. It did happen since the 1870s. So there was life moving forward, but there were restrictions, divisions. So in 2013, I ran for Congress. This is not because of affirmative action. I was not catapulted into politics because of the color of my skin, or my sexuality, or my sexual preference. That had nothing to do with it. I made a decision because as a free, independent American citizen, as part of my pursuit of happiness, I decided to go into politics. And because I went into politics, and I was a Republican, fighting against another Republican in 2013, I went out and spoke to the public. And in speaking to the public, I was asking questions, answering their questions, and explaining my views on why I was running for Congress. I believe this is important to the conversation, and I want you to understand. This is a video from 2013. This is my conversation at Binghamton University, speaking to the college Republicans of Binghamton University. This was, I believe it was in May of 2013. And the question came to me in reference to affirmative action. Even in 2013, 10 years ago, this was still a hot button issue. And was it still necessary? And I want you to hear that conversation. I want you to hear what we had to say, what I was asked, and how I answered.
I'm just curious, what is your stance on affirmative action?
I don't like it. I don't believe it. I don't believe in it in the same way that I don't believe in equal rights for women. Oh yeah, that caught their attention, didn't it? No, and I would say this for any group. Okay, what are we actually saying when we say, well, I need affirmative action because I'm black? We need it because you're a woman. You're a woman of color. Oh my God, you must need even more. That's what these laws are saying. What they are saying is, I am not the equal of anyone in this room. I am not capable of, as anyone else in this room, to do any of the things they can do, and nor are you. Nor are you. That's what the laws are saying. We have to help you because you can't do it. And we are not raising the bar for everyone. We are going to lower the bar just for you. Because you are special. I don't know. My definition of special doesn't tend to go and make people feel worse about themselves. My definition of special makes people feel better. I don't want to be compared to someone else because we have to bring it down. Well, they scored too high, you scored so we're going to go with you. No, I've never had that in my life. I've never gotten a job in my life. I've never dealt with that in the military. I've never dealt with that anywhere. And I would hit someone if they actually told me that to my face. So let me stop there, and you'll be able to see the full conversation between me and the Binghamton University College Libertarians in 2013 at your leisure. The link will be in the description. But I want to explain something I said there, because what affirmative action was, it had morphed. It had changed due to politics. Over 4 decades, roughly, we had seen that affirmative action, which was meant as a bridge, a transition towards a time where people will be more unified, had become a political tool to divide people, to oppress groups of people, which is what I was highlighting in that conversation with the libertarians. We saw the system come about where now it was being used to take away agency from minorities and from women. That you don't have the capability. It is the government stating you do not have the ability to change your life. You don't have the ability to run your life. That because you are incapable of making decisions affirmatively for your life and to benefit your life, that the government must step in for you and to support you, to make these decisions for you and to make sure that these decisions stick. That is a fundamental difference in what affirmative action has become and what it was meant to be. We started with the idea that it is meant to acknowledge and bridge people to a point where we are all the same, that we are all individuals, that we have the equal opportunity to succeed or fail in our endeavor to have happiness, to succeed in our lives, however we wish to succeed. And it had gone from that decision, an independent agency that we each had to make decisions in our lives, to an oppressive decision-making body of the government deciding these are the only choices you have, that you have only limited options, and those options were decided by a amorphous group of individuals, an oligarchy, that have come down and weighed in on decisions of your private life. They have taken away all of your agency, merely because of the color of your skin, your sex, and your sexuality. This, I believe, is oppressive and wrong. Even in 2013, I was able to acknowledge this and to point this out. I think it's critical. If you do not have agency, you do not have life. You are a slave. We have, through affirmative action, reinstituted slavery, but we have a new name for it. Now it's the government helping you. It is helping you because you lack the ability to help yourself. You are a child, and the government is your parent, and they will control your life and your decisions. It is horrendous and horrific. And I know there are those who will say, but you misunderstand. No, I do not. Yes, this is somewhat anecdotal, but there is evidence, and I will get to that in a moment. But it is very clearly a decision that we are going to lower the standards. If you must have a government agency step in and say that the standards that exist as a minimum to accomplish a goal are not acceptable for those specific groups, these categories of beings that do not raise to that limit, that you are not capable of achieving these minimum standards for minimum effectiveness in various fields of life, and they must lower those standards because of your category, they are saying you are subhuman, that you are incapable of doing the minimum that is expected of a human being. They are dehumanizing you, and they are stripping you of agency. The goal of affirmative action no longer exists. And I want to be clear about this because this also applies to women in terms of the equal rights movement. And in that same discussion with the college libertarians, I was asked a question about this as well.
Like, we're all, all the women here in college or whatnot, we are obviously actively going out there and putting ourselves out there in the workforce. We're not going to be like housewives or anything.
You might be. There's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's what people want to do, but that's not what I personally want. Most people here are going to get an education to get a career. Most of us. But
did you need a law? Did you need the government to lower the bar?
No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying.
But that is what I'm saying. I point this part and this question out is, even as we saw in 2013 with a college libertarian, a young woman who is asking the question, well, we need equality. It has to be a specific type. Her view was that she wanted to have a career, and that others who didn't want that career, well, they're not as important as her feelings and her goals. My point is, they're all equal, that they all have the same rights and achievements, and that we do not need government to interject. Very much like who goes to college. The government doesn't need to decide who goes to college. You make that decision. You're an individual. And you are able to achieve on your merits as a student. The government doesn't need to intercede. The government doesn't need to inject you into a college or into a college libertarian meeting or to be involved in politics. You make that decision. No matter what your life choices are, you get to decide that. That is your agency. And the government should not be the one deciding that for you. That is my argument. The government does not need to be micromanaging your life, especially when we have these arbitrary rules that are involved that shift over the decades based on individuals we do not elect, that we do not know, that decide, oh, well, there's new sets of rules now. That was in 2013 that I was making those arguments, and I think it's important to see how that shapes the argument we see today, now and as a reaction to the Supreme Court. The intent of affirmative action had a time limit on it. It was meant to achieve a goal, to unify America, to emphasize what was said in 1776, that all Americans are equal, that we are intrinsically endowed with rights by birth. That is the entire point. And that's what affirmative action was there to emphasize. And as we continued down the road, and people did accept that and did integrate that into American society, affirmative action had less and less of a point. And because it had less of a point, it was morphed into a political movement, a tool of political objectives to be able to better help political agendas. And that's when it became another creature altogether, because its emphasis was on segregation, on division, and on equity, on prioritizing groups of people over others based arbitrarily by the needs of a political agenda. Let me explain that as clear as I can. What we see with equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion is you are no longer an individual. You are merely a collection of categories. Categories that some agents of government and politics have decided are important or not important. And based on your ranking on their scale of what is politically advantageous, you have agency and power to an extent, and no more than that. When we saw affirmative action put in place in the 1970s, in my own lifetime, in my family, we took in individuals who escaped from the segregated South and came to New York City, to the Bronx, because they were an interracial couple. And fearing for their lives, they had escaped north to New York City to continue their interracial marriage. In 2023, walking down virtually any street in America at any given time, you will see not just interracial relationships, but children who are the product of that interracial commitment. In fact, we've elected a politician. President of the United States, Barack Obama, was a result of an interracial relationship. And he was not judged harshly for being an interracial individual. He was judged harshly on his politics and his ideology, but not the color of his skin, not on his birthright, but what he was doing with that and as a symbol of that, which are very different things. So we have to separate our emotion here from what we intend and what we feel would be right, what is the moral issue, and what is actually happening. What is the impact? What is the effect? And what the intention of affirmative action was when it was implemented is not the reality of how it is used today. Today, it is used to enforce safe spaces, which are exclusionary areas, usually limited only to black people, excluding white individuals. That is not affirmative action. That is not beneficial. That is not unifying. That is not what we saw Lincoln nor affirmative action try and do. That's not what the civil rights movement was about. This is exclusionary. It is racist, both on a social level, with individuals able to date whomever they wish, to be able to live virtually anywhere they want or can afford to live in the United States, to be in careers whatever they wish to be, including in politics, and to raise themselves up. Affirmative action, the Civil War, the intent of the founders of the United States has been achieved in large part. Not perfectly, but then again, there is no perfect system. There are no perfect human beings. It isn't perfect, but it is so beneficial, so far above the norm that we have lines of millions of individuals legally and illegally trying to enter the United States, because there is no other nation in the world that has achieved this in such a unifying manner. Again, we'll say, we thank you for staying with us through this, because we are trying to have an honest review of what is happening and what will happen. And to understand that, we had to understand our past. Now let's understand our present. And to do that, we look at the Supreme Court decision. The case is the Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated versus the President and Fellows of Harvard College, and this also involves the University of North Carolina. It is accepted by all individuals in this trial, in this case, that admissions to college are not fair. That is not in dispute. It is never a question. The question is, they are not fair, they are not equal. It is understood by everyone. The question is that permissible? Is that acceptable? There is a prejudice and bias in getting into college. It is not based on income, it is based on color of skin, among other factors. And there is a bias based on political ideology that is also inherent in this. That is established by the case. That is accepted. In fact, that is the question. Is that bias, is that prejudice constitutional? Based on the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, and the Civil War. And of course, the affirmative action. So let's look at this. Now, I specifically have several pages here that I want to go to. You can look at the entire decision, and I would suggest you might. But there's a couple of points that I want to bring up. On page 18, what led to the Brown versus Board of Education decision. Law which operates upon one man should operate equally upon all. This is a very important observation with that. In fact, President James Garfield observed the 14th Amendment would hold over every American citizen without regard to color the protecting shield of law. So what they are saying here, and they are reminding us that in multiple laws in the amendments, In the initial intention, it is that we are equal and that the government's place is to enforce that equality, not equity. They are not the same. They are mutually exclusive of each other. You cannot have equity and equality. And the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, the laws of the United States were built around equality of opportunity, equality of individuals, not equity. That brings us to page 25. This is the opinion as written by Justice Roberts. And in the third paragraph, brings us back to Justice Powell and looking at many of the decisions on affirmative action and its application, about whether or not it is constitutional, whether or not the government is constitutionally allowed to restrict individuals' rights and freedoms based on the arbitrary factor of their color of skin, their sex, or their sexuality. And what we see that is Justice Powell stated that 3 of the 4 arguments for government or institutions being biased and prejudiced do not apply. Quote, reducing the historic deficit of traditionally disfavored minorities in medical schools was akin to preferring members of any one group for no reason other than their race or ethnic origin. That is the point. Yet that was discrimination for its own sake. Justice Powell also observed that the goal of remedying the effects of societal discrimination was also insufficient because it was not an amorphous concept of injury that may be ageless in its reach into the past. What are we saying here? That in using the shield of we have to protect minorities, we have to protect certain classes of people, the government must prejudice itself in favor of certain groups in terms of equity over others, that American citizens are categories, and those categories must have a priority, and we must protect, as a government, certain priorities over others, that individuals must be prejudiced against. That seems counterintuitive, but yet that is the argument that has been used over and over again. Although that has not been the sole determining factor of the argument, that has usually been at least a predominant majority of it, as Justice Powell said when he was addressing 3 out of 4 of the issues of affirmative action in the past. Again, let me remind you, I'm not a legal scholar, but neither do you need to be. We can look at the decision and look over what is being stated, and it's very clear and it is very expressive. In page 50, in the paragraphs 2 and 3, I think there's another important part here. And again, this is from Justice Clarence Thomas in talking about his decision. And he said, he wrote separately in Grutter, and again, talking about race relations, prejudice, and equity, explaining that the use of race in higher education admissions decisions, regardless of whether intended to help or hurt, violates the 14th Amendment. Let's stop. Many of the arguments are saying, but the intention is positive, that affirmative action intends to be a positive thing, that discrimination, that prejudice and bias are intended to help to unify the nation. But that doesn't mean it is doing that. Again, intent is the road to hell, nor does it mean that they are constitutional. Intention is not law. That is the application of law, and it can be misapplied. Let's go on. He says, in the decades since, I have repeatedly stated that Grutter was wrongly decided and should have been overruled, that affirmative action should have been removed even in the past. He goes on to say, because the court today applies genuine strict scrutiny to the race-conscious admissions policies employed at Harvard and the University of North Carolina, and finds that they fail that searching review, I join the majority opinion in full. I write separately to offer an originalist defense of the colorblind Constitution. to explain further that the flaws of the court's Grutter jurisprudence, to clarify that all forms of discrimination based on race, including so-called affirmative action, are prohibited under the Constitution, and to emphasize the pernicious effects of all such discrimination. So take out the legalese. What is he saying? That just because you think, just because you feel that there is a good to being prejudiced and biased, it doesn't mean that it is, nor does it mean that it's constitutional. In fact, the Constitution is explicit in saying that we are individuals, not categories of various factors, that we get to have agency over our lives, and the micromanagement of government is explicitly prohibited by the Constitution and the amendments, that this is wrong. That no matter which group you're talking about, affirmative action is bad. Whether it's against blacks or whites, separate is not equal, and prejudice is always bad. It's as explicit as he can say it. That when we look at this and we take out which groups, take away whether it's whites or Asians, blacks or Hispanics, regardless of that, what is Harvard actually doing? Harvard is segregating its college. It is banning people based on the color of their skin. Period. Full stop. And that is something we have fought a war over, we have amendments for, that we have a Declaration of Independence and Constitution to address. It is wrong. It has been accepted as wrong worldwide, and we have tried to make corrections. And while it was an attempt to make affirmative action was an attempt to correct these problems, the intent did not lead to positives. We have more separation today, not less. We have more people being attacked about their color of skin, their sexuality, their sex, not less. It is a dividing factor in American politics because it has become a political hot potato, an easy emotion button that can be pressed in every election to be able to take away people's rights and freedoms, to make them slaves to the government or to any political organization. It has become a tool of subservience. Looking at page 62 of the decision, looking at paragraph 1, racial segregation the argument was made by many who are looking for separate but equal. Racial segregation did not necessarily imply that it's inferiority of either race to the other. Just because we have separate by equal, just because we have differences, we have the separation, the division, the equity of race, does not mean that that's bad. It's okay for us to categorize certain people above others and to give preference to certain groups of people based on the color of their skin, their sex, their sexuality. That's okay because it's not inherently bad. That's not a negative to anyone because you can still live a good life. Congress did not agree with that. Separate is not equal. Equity is not constitutional. Supporters of the soon-to-be 1875 Act successfully countered that symmetrical restrictions did not constitute equality, and they did so on colorblind terms. Symmetrical restrictions. Systemic racism. Instituting systemic racism, creating it, like with critical race theory, like with affirmative action, like with the ERA, Equal Rights Amendment. These things do not constitute equality. They are tools of equity, which is the exact opposite of equality. It is a government imposition. It is government micromanagement. It is government stepping in and taking control of your life because they value you as less than human, that you are a child, you are a slave. You cannot make decisions because you have no agency. In every single case, even in 1875, Congress was willing to accept that, and it doesn't matter which color we are speaking about, it applies to all of them. When the government says you don't have agency, it doesn't matter what color of skin you have, it doesn't matter what gender or sexual preference you have, they're saying that you're a slave and you have no rights. Let's move on to page 141. This is in the dissent by Justice Sotomayor. And in her explanation, Justice Sotomayor says in her first paragraph and second paragraph, the limited use of race has helped equalize educational opportunities for students of every race and background and has improved racial diversity on college campuses. Although progress has been slow and imperfect, race-conscious college admissions policies have advanced the constitutional guarantee of equality and have promoted Brown's vision of a nation with more inclusive schools. Let's break that down for a second. She's saying that limited use, that, again, they refer to affirmative action is limited. They keep always referring back to that it is not all-encompassing, that it was created and meant to be limited. Their thing is that limitation has not run out, that it needs to be continued, but it is a limited prejudice, and they accept and understand that there is a prejudice that is existing. Even in Sotomayor's argument, it is a prejudice, it is a separation, it is an intrusion of government onto individual lives. They accept that, but they say that it's necessary. That is the argument that is being made. It is necessary because it has a positive outcome, that its intention is more valuable than its action. This is what they are saying, that it is more important to have a positive intent than to actually have racism, sexism, prejudice, equity. And they are trying to say that somehow by categorizing individuals based on the color of their skin, that creates equality of individuals. It cannot. If you have taken away people's agency and reduce them to nothing more than their inherent attributes. You're a woman, you're a man, you're gay, straight, whatever. If you have boiled people down to that essence, and you have then further intruded on their lives by not only dehumanizing them, but now categorizing them in terms of importance, you can never go to the point of saying, well, they have agency and they are equal. They cannot be. By definition, you have removed all equality and instituted equity. Justice Sotomayor goes on to say, today, this court stands in the way and rolls back decades of precedent and momentous progress. Do you notice that always the left always like to say, well, we've always had these laws. That's not true. We haven't always had them. And in fact, we fought many wars over this because we didn't have this and we didn't accept this. So it isn't always true. It isn't, we have had decades of precedent, but that doesn't mean the precedent is correct. We had decades of slavery. That was a precedent, but that wasn't correct. We had decades of Jim Crow and black codes. That wasn't correct. Precedent does not equal good. But Justice Sotomayor wants to substitute that as her argument, that there is precedent that she likes, and because it's existed and she likes it, then we should keep it. That's not a legal argument. That's not a constitutional argument. Let's go on. She goes on to say, it holds that race can no longer be used in a limited way in college admissions to achieve such critical benefits. That's good. That's true. You cannot prejudice and bias college admissions against anyone, white, Asian, or anyone else. That is a positive. Let's go on. In so holding, the court cements a superficial rule of color blindness as a constitutional principle in an endemically segregated society where race has always mattered and continues to matter. This is politicking. This is Justice Sotomayor being purely political. This is a political agenda and ideology, not constitutional law. This has nothing to do with the Constitution. This has nothing to do with the amendments. She has made it clear that this is about her political beliefs. Let's say it again. The Supreme Court, in making a decision that Justice Sotomayor does not like, has cemented a superficial rule that it is superficial that the Constitution be colorblind. She believes that the Constitution must be race relevant, that it has to be race aware, that everything in the Constitution, the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Eighth Amendment, that it all must be based in context of your race, in terms of your sexuality and your sex gender. This is the context she wants it in. You have a right to free speech based on your color of skin, based on your sex, male and female, based on your sexual preferences. That's not what the Second Amendment is about, but that's what she wants it to be about. Your right to privacy is based on these same factors. That's not what it's written as, but that's what she wants it in. If the Constitution is relevant and is focused on being color aware, then everything is in context of that. That you could take away someone's right to speak or to defend themselves, or the right to privacy, or the punishment of law can all be defined based on someone's color of skin, sex, and gender. Do you want someone to tell you you can't speak because of the color of your skin? Do you want someone to tell you you cannot defend yourself because of the color of your skin? Do you want the government to step up and say, because of who your sexual preference, you do not get a right of privacy, or that you should be more or less punished by law? That is what Justice Sotomayor is saying. That is a political position that has nothing to do with the Constitution or law. That is politics. She goes on to say, our society, the modern society, is endemically segregated, that it is institutionally biased. Where is the evidence of that? I understand the feeling of that, but that's not accurate. That has never been accurate. We will go on to show you how inaccurate that is, because she's saying that people who are minorities, women, do not have choices, that they do not have agency. They cannot succeed because the system is built against them. And if that were true, we would expect to see that in various aspects of our life, whether it be in business, whether it be in economy, whether it be in Congress and our government. There should be clear examples of that. And as we will show you, both in our military, our Congress, our economy, these things aren't true. That it's not accurate, but it is politically advantageous to give people that emotional belief. Again, this is about politics. This has nothing to do with actual constitutional law. Even as we continue to see Justice Sotomayor to make her case, and again, I advise you to read through the entire decision and dissent that was made, we can see that she highlights on page 152 that the decisions in Brown and post-Brown were in reference to trying to bring equality, not equity. That the decisions were based on the idea that the Constitution is not color aware, but color blind. That its decisions, its rights, and its freedoms guaranteed and established do not apply to someone's color of skin, their sexuality, their gender, but in fact is about equality of everyone. That the ultimate goal is racial equality of opportunity. That is the ultimate goal. And affirmative action was created and allowed under that intent of trying to achieve racial equality, which she disagrees with. She believes in color awareness. She believes in segregation. She believes in equity and not equality. Justice Sotomayor goes on to say in her dissent on page 155, more broadly, inclusive institutions that are visibly open to talented and qualified individuals of every race and ethnicity instill public confidence in the legitimacy and integrity of those institutions and the diverse set of graduates that they cultivate. That is particularly true in the context of higher education, where colleges and universities play a critical role in maintaining the fabric of society and serve as the training grounds for a large number of our nation's leaders. It is thus an objective of the highest order, a compelling interest, indeed, that universities pursue the benefits of racial diversity and ensure that the diffusion of knowledge and opportunity is available to students of all races. So she's saying that we must have equity, that the government must intrude and must inject itself into our lives, that individuals, regardless of their qualifications, must be allowed and others must be denied, again, regardless of their qualifications, on the mere basis of color of skin and race. This is insulting and this is dangerous, because what she is talking about is the future leaders who become aware of this system, who are groomed in this system, perpetuate this system. A system of bias, a system of prejudice, a system of equity, not equality. And this is what she wants for the future of our future nation's leaders. That as long as the government can establish a compelling interest, they are allowed to do anything. That no matter what is in the Constitution, no matter what amendments have been passed, that as long as the interest of good, the intent is good enough in their argument, that the government is allowed to take away any and every right. This is the argument that she is making. This is what she is saying, or I should be more clear, this is the consequence of what she is trying to push forward. This is the ideology that she is pushing forward. This has nothing to do with the Constitution. This has nothing to do with the reality of the world. She is saying that the government, if it feels compelled, must take away your rights, and can do so for something as arbitrary as the color of your skin, your gender, or your sexual preference. That the government has the right to supersede all of your God-given rights. I disagree with this. And anyone who's reading this should disagree with it as well. In understanding the consequence, I understand the intent. She's talking about intent. It is a good thing. We intend this to unify people. The reality, the actual consequence, the real world execution of this is not to unify people, but to categorize them, to provide them with equity, and to divide people in the most dehumanizing way possible. She doesn't accept that. She doesn't see that, but that's what is happening. And perhaps the biggest proof of what I am talking about and what Justice Sotomayor is presenting, along with the other liberal justices on the Supreme Court, who also concurred with her, she says, today the court concludes that indifference to race is the only constitutionally permissible means to achieve racial equality in college admissions. That interpretation of the 14th Amendment is not only contrary to precedent and the entire teachings of our history, but is also grounds in the illusion that racial inequality was a problem of a different generation. Let's stop there. By saying that colleges cannot be racist, that they cannot have bias or prejudice, that they must accept people based on merit and the qualifications of that individual, that is somehow racist, that somehow is sexist, that this is a negative, that merit alone is not a act of agency by individuals. No, the government must step in, because under her understanding, what she has said, those who are minorities and women are not good enough. Merit is not enough. They will never measure up. They are substandard. And because they are inherently substandard and do not have agency, the government must step in, because if we were to judge them on merit alone, they would fail. That is what she has just said. Taking it out of the legalese and understanding the politics that she is inserting here. She goes on to say, entrenched racial inequality remains a reality today. Entrenched racial... Again, I have to go to, and I will show more of this, entrenched racial inequality. When we have mixed races across this nation, we have interracial relationships as a norm, as opposed to just 4 or 5 decades ago, individuals were being killed for that it was illegal, and now it's a norm that individuals who are gay getting married, that was something that was illegal and was a crime in many cases, is now normal. But she's saying that this is entrenched inequality. I don't see that. I see the messaging where it's necessary for a political ideology. I understand the political advantage that view provides to certain people, but that doesn't convey the reality of it. But let's go on. That it is true for society writ large, and more specifically for Harvard and the University of North Carolina, two institutions with a long history of racial exclusion, ignoring race will not equalize a society that is racially unequal. What was true in the 1860s and again in 1954 is true today. Equality requires acknowledgement of inequality. Let's think about that. She's saying that America has not changed from 1860. Are you sure? Are you sure? Justice Sotomayor, nothing has changed in America from 1860 to today? That doesn't make any sense in any context that you would like to look at it. Forget about the technology and the way that has changed. Ignore the fact that we have more people of different races and religions and ideologies all in the United States, 350 million of them. Ignore that for a moment. Ignore the fact that you have a freedom of religion that we see constantly being on display in our nation. Ignore the fact that there are interracial relationships, that we have had individuals who have succeeded based on their color, their sex, their gender, their identity. Regardless of all of that, you're saying that everyone is running around as slaves, that they are living on plantations, and that they are shackled. Please show the proof of that. The United States of 2023 is nowhere close to the world of 1860 in any shape or context. It sounds really impressive politically if you spout that message, and it sounds like a message you would hear from the left and progressives, but when you think about it, when you take away the emotion from it, it makes no sense on any level. And to say that the United States of 2023 is the same as 1954, at the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, is also ludicrous. Again, for the same reasons. There is nothing about the world of 1954 that is the same as today on any level, in terms of individual freedom, in terms of individual expression, in terms of individual opportunity in the United States as it exists today. None of that existed to the same degree as in 1954 or 1860. She is spouting propaganda as a Supreme Court justice in a case that is based on constitutionality. She is actually trying to say that you must view the world and the Constitution based on her political ideology singularly. That there is no other way to look at the Constitution, to look at the amendments and our laws in our nation without the glasses of her political ideology. That doesn't make any sense. That is wonderful propaganda. It may be great for progressive ideology, but that has nothing to do with the Constitution. And thus, what she's talking about here is not trying to justify whether or not affirmative action should exist. She's trying to justify whether Americans should be progressive or not. Two very different arguments. And perhaps there's one other thing that I want to show about Justice Sotomayor, found on page 208. And this is her final summation and her final paragraph. And she says, notwithstanding this court's actions, however, society's progress towards equality cannot be permanently halted. Diversity is now a fundamental American value housed in our varied and multicultural American community that will only continue to grow. Let me stop there. Society's progress towards equality cannot be permanently halted. When did we stop? We fought the Civil War. We fought the Civil Rights Movement. We have constantly been improving on this. Not to say that we are perfected it in 2023, but we have constantly changed, and we have made dramatic changes in our society that has engendered the desire, the willingness of people from across the world to come to this nation. There are people in Angola who are entering the United States through the southern border because America is so free and so there's so much opportunity. There is so much equality of opportunity in America as opposed to Angola or anywhere else in the world that they will come into our nation illegally to take part of it because it is better than everywhere else. Again, not perfect, but better. And she is completely discounting that various people in Africa, South America, Europe, all across the world are coming into America because they have more opportunity of equality than anywhere else in the world. She's discounting that completely and trying to invert it in fact to say that we need equity. Diversity is now a fundamental value of America. America was always diverse. From its inception, it was diverse. It is not a new factor. It isn't a value. It is a fact. It is something that has always existed and will continue to exist. The United States is made up of people of every culture, every religion, every ideology found on the face of the earth, and we always have. That's not a value. That is a fact. Again, she has a lens of a propagandist, not of a Supreme Court justice, in what she is saying here. She is trying to promote an ideology, not constitutionality. Let's go forward. The pursuit of racial diversity will go on, although the court has stripped out almost all uses of race in college admissions. Universities can and should continue to use all available tools to meet society's needs for diversity in education. So, she has said, the Supreme Court, in a decision she doesn't like, has stripped out prejudice and bias. That they have almost completely removed bias and prejudice from the admissions system in education, and she wants it in place. And she is insisting that we must have prejudice and bias inserted into our education system for the next generation to grow up, for them to understand and to promote and continue. She wants more of the government involved in our lives and to deny the agency of every individual in these schools. This is what she is saying. This is the consequence of what she is saying. And that is important to get across. She is promoting bias. She is promoting prejudice. She is promoting racism and sexism and every other ism you can think of. She is promoting this as if it is a virtue, and that is something that we must instill in our next generation. This is mind-warpingly stupid, but let's go on. Despite the court's unjustified exercise of power, it is the normal operation and purpose of the Supreme Court to decide constitutionality, not politics, not political preference, not to propagandize. It is the purpose of the Supreme Court to decide if something is constitutional and therefore allowed in America, as opposed to whatever political fad may be going on at any given moment. Despite the court's unjustified exercise of power, the opinion today will serve only to highlight the court's own impotence in the face of an America whose cries for equality resound. She's not promoting equality. She's promoting equity, which is entirely the antithesis of equality. That is the progressive mantra. And to say that the court, in saying meritocracy should be the deciding factor in allowing someone to go to Harvard, to say that somehow that's bad, and instead we should impose equity, we should have a bias and prejudice rule of the day, seems to be completely opposed to what she's saying. It's amazing to me. She goes on to say, as has been the case before in the history of American democracy, the arc of the moral universe will bend towards racial justice despite the court's efforts today to impede its progress. What are you talking about, woman? That we're going to bend towards racial justice? Any descriptor of justice is not justice. That is a view, a bias, that is a warping of the inherent idea. Racial justice isn't justice, it's justice based on someone's view of race as a criteria of justice. It's not the same thing. I think this is important, and I hope that people will take the time to go back over what I've just done, that review. And I know it's short, and you can see the whole thing for yourself. I didn't include Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's response because she was not part of the decision. She did not hear the arguments. She was not part of the discussion, so I don't care what she had to say. It's not important. But you might. You may want to look that over and decide for yourself. But I want you to understand what they're talking about. This is how bad. Remember, they're saying that this is absolutely necessary. It has been critical. Affirmative action cannot stop. Meritocracy has no place. Since 1976 to 2018, the racial demographic trends in college enrollment is that we have seen that blacks in college have gone from 9.6% to 13.4%. For Hispanics, it went from 0.7% to 19.5%. Whites in college has gone from 84.3% to 55.2%. We have seen more individuals go in. We have achieved the meritocracy. These numbers equal or exceed the number of individuals in our population. So one of the things I would want to emphasize for those who think we must continue to have this is, what's your goal? What is the defining factor of affirmative action? What's your end point? We have affirmative action. We have as many people that exceeds the proportion of the population that are involved in our colleges. Why do we still need this? Oh, you may say, well, Mike, you don't understand. Because what about the middle classes? Okay, we need affirmative action to make sure that people economically are diverse. Well, okay, looking at the Brookings Institution, we can see in 2019 that when we compare racial composition of the middle class with full income distribution, white Americans are slightly overrepresented at 59% compared to 57% of the population, 2% more. Black Americans make up 12% of the middle class and 13% of the population, a 1.1% difference. 18% of the middle class identifies as Hispanic compared to 19% of the population, 1% difference. Asian Americans comprise 7% of the middle class and are 7% of the population. There is a 1% difference of the middle class versus the actual proportion of people in this nation. What are you trying to achieve with diversity? We have got it. Diversity, equity, inclusion, we've already attained without those things. We've already got it. Affirmative action, if this was its purpose, has achieved its goal. Why do we need to continue? We already had individuals in our military. Our militaries are diverse. Most recently, Kamala Harris was over at Army graduation, and she was speaking to 25% of those who were present were women. 37% were minorities. Our military has long ago become diversified. In fact, the first diverse General Benjamin O. Davis, was a World War II general. First time that we had someone of color as a general. Let's look at this from a different point of view. Let's look at, we have long had our military since roughly the 1940s, 1950s, has been integrated and diversified. How about what we see in Congress? Well, looking from 1870 to the year 2020, what do we see? A steady growth in the number of individuals who are minorities and women that are in our House of Representatives and even the Senate, going from 1929 in the 71st Congress until today. There has been nothing but a progression of integration, of diversity, of meritocracy. We have seen that long before there was ever any civil rights movement, long before there was any affirmative action, we had integration. Now, was it standard? No. Was it sufficient? Absolutely not. But as our nation grew and as our nation diversified, as we had more people from more countries come into America, as more Americans were mingling in interracial marriages and children, as America grew, so did the number of individuals who were minorities in our government, exploding in 1969 to double digits and continuing to grow up to this day. Is that enough? Maybe, maybe not. But we have achieved the goal. No one is being restricted. As I was saying in 2013 to the libertarian woman that you saw, no one's being restricted. If you can get into college, you get into college. You're not restricted by your gender, your race, your sexuality, your anything. You're allowed in if you can qualify, if you have the meritocracy of it. We have seen since 1972, Cheryl Chisholm ran for, in 1972, not only was she in Congress, but she was also ran for president. Let's see, that was Cheryl Chisholm, and then there's Jesse Jackson in 1984, 1988, he ran for president. Let's see, Herman Cain in 2012, who was also a successful businessman, he ran for president. 2016, Ben Carson ran for president, a successful doctor, a world-renowned doctor, ran for president. We had, in 2008, Barack Obama, an interracial individual, was able to run and win under the presidency, and he was able to be reelected in 2012. He had 61% of the vote in 2008, which is a majority of Americans in this systemically racist system that they're telling us that we have to fight against. Not only are members of Congress interracially diverse, but also the presidency, and he was reelected under that. And in 2012, with 58% of the vote, he was reelected president. That's interesting. Let's see. Colin Powell became the first Secretary of State as a Republican. That's interesting. We've also had Charles Quinton Brown, who became the chief of staff of the armed forces. Kamala Harris currently is sitting in the White House. And we are continuing to see, according to January 9th, this is from Pew Research, January 9th, 2023, U.S. Congress continues to grow in racial and ethnic diversity. We have Tim Scott is a senator. We have Vivek Ramaswamy, who is running for the presidency of the United States. I'm trying to understand this. Politically, we have achieved diversity. Individuals have been successful at life and have chosen to run for the presidency of the United States based on, without exclusion of their gender, their sexuality, or their race. We have individuals who have become part of our government at every level of government, local, state, and federal, that have become part of our government regardless of their gender, their sexuality, or their color of skin. We have that in business. We have in our society individuals interracially mixed throughout our society, and no one blinks an eye. Why do we need affirmative action, which is the conscious and absolute prejudice and bias against individuals based on the color of their skin? Because we see a resurgence of racism and sexism under critical race theory, under the progressive ideology that demands that there must be an argument, that it is never enough because you are a category, and that category must be ranked, and the only people who can do that are the ones who are in charge, those who are elected, your neo-nobles, that they have agency over your life because you are not qualified to do so. Again, going back to my conversation in 2013 at Binghamton University, where I explained as I ran for Congress, the whole point of affirmative action today, not what it was created for, but its real world consequence is you are not capable. You are not qualified to run your own life. And therefore, government or political agents must step in and run your life for you because you are a serf. Look, I've taken well over an hour to try and run through this, to try and explain this, both in what we have seen in the past, what we are seeing today, and let's sum this up very simply, going to the future. If progressives have their way, they will increase the amount of bias and prejudice in America, whether it's safe spaces or whether it's more diversity and equity and inclusion, whether it's indoctrinating children with critical race theory, or as Sotomayor has insisted, in going to colleges and programming them to make sure that they will continue to use bias and prejudice in our colleges, in our college institutions, so that they can promote that throughout our society. If we allow the progressive ideology to continue, we will see America step backwards towards the 1860s. I don't say that as some kind of slogan. That is their purpose. In trying to increase the amount, to either maintain or increase the amount of affirmative action, we are literally taking steps backwards to create an environment where individuals are valued based on the color of their skin and their gender and their sexuality. By definition, this is unconstitutional. By definition, this is a loss of freedom and rights, not an increase of it. You will hear many progressives and many Democrats say that it's the exact opposite. They will say that they're fighting for equality. They are lying. They are fighting for equity. They're using the emotion of an image, a romanticized image of the 1860s to try and gain power over you. But if you are supporting affirmative action, equal rights for women, many of the movements for the LGBTQ and especially the trans movement, then you are accepting that you do not have any agency in your life, that you are subhuman, and you must have some outside group and agency control your life for you. I reject it. I've rejected it throughout my entire life. I reject it today. You are capable. You have agency over your life. That is the pursuit of life, happiness, that we have talked about in our Declaration of Independence. That is the purpose of our nation. We are built on that block. We should not crush it now just because it is politically advantageous for a minority of individuals in the United States who want more control and power. And those individuals count the Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor and Jackson on their side. But maybe you think I'm wrong. Maybe in going through this in some greater detail, you say, Mike, you've missed something. You misunderstood some critical factor. Maybe there's some aspect of my life and experiences that you'll say, Mike, you just haven't seen this right. Okay, let's have that conversation. I look forward to seeing your comments. Let's talk about this and see, what do we all agree? I thank you for taking the time to spend with me on this very important issue. And I look forward to hearing the answers from around the world. I look forward to seeing you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on our Sunday live stream. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, admitted he has not read the Arizona immigration law. Let's think about that for a moment. I know it is a difficult task to stand up in front of our peers and say to Congress and say that Congress has failed to listen to voters.
You here at CPAC said yes to President Donald Trump in 2016, and I know you're going to say yes to. She was very aware that she had the flag in her hands and that the flag was dragging on the ground. That is a intentional action. She knows what she is doing. She then drops the flag. Understand the logic, and we see this in social media on a regular basis, and it's something that Newsweek decided not to tell you about.
I held the AR-15 in my hand. I wish I had it. It is as heavy as 10 boxes that you might be moving. And the bullet that is utilized, a 50 caliber, these kinds of bullets, need to be licensed and do not need to be on the street.
That's right. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, a representative in Congress who is writing laws to deny American citizens their rights, has no idea what she's talking about. And they are against the vaccine mandate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you support that?
We shouldn't have any problem in meeting that error rate, because last time I checked, there were not a lot of planes crashing into each other at airports, right? You can meet a very, very stringent accuracy rate when it's important, when it matters, like in federal elections.
No one wants to point out the quote from Joe Biden where he is admitting that he is willing to lie to the American people.